Okay people, these are the tools and materials that I used for this blouse tutorial. So you guys remember this pink gingham material that I got from Fabricland? I got a total of 3 meters and I love the shade of pink or purple or wine. I don't even know what to call it, but I really like how it's a very nice in-between shade and it just looks really cool. So I also got white long zip that is about 22 inches long. I got white thread as well as the pattern for this blouse. I have a separate video and I'm going to be linking it down below, so if you haven't seen the pattern tutorial already, please check it out before you watch the rest of this sewing tutorial. I also got some interfacing which I'm going to be using to stiffen the facings for this blouse. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut out all of the panels I need. Right now I'm cutting the back panel, which I need 2 pieces for, one for the left and one for the right, so we can have a center back seam through which we can put our zip. So don't forget to snip your notches, especially when it comes to your waist dart and even the side darts that the front panel has, as you can see here. So I'm just going in here to finish off the rest of the front, cut around the arm curve, as well as mark those important notches, because it just makes putting the garment much more easier when I tell you, because when you know where these notches are, you don't really have to think a lot about where they belong and which panel should go with which panel. So I'm just going in here to finish off the rest of the front neckline before going in to cut my sleeve. So because of how wide the sleeve is, I folded the material in the opposite direction. Normally I'll fold selvage to selvage and cut along the grain line, but this sleeve I folded the material horizontally and not vertically, so I could cut 2 pieces in one go. So right now I'm going ahead to cut my peplum, and the way I did the pattern for this peplum is I cut a quarter of a circle. If you've seen the pattern tutorial already, you know what I mean. And I folded the material twice, so I folded it in half and folded it in half again, so I have 2 folds on the 2 ends of this pattern, as you can see here. So by the time I cut one piece, I have a full circle. But because I want to have a zip in the center back, I folded this material in a wonky, unique way, so I have a little bit of fabric coming off on this side that is close to the bottom of the screen, so that way I can easily add 1 or 2 centimeters for a zip allowance without adding too much excess to the entire pattern. So if this is too much headache for you, you can just go ahead and make the full circle skirt pattern, which I already have a video for, and you can just easily spread out the full circle, cut it open on one end, add your zip allowance before going ahead to cut your peplum. So when here I'm just cutting off any excess for that center back. I added 2 centimeters because I just like to have a little bit more when it comes to zip allowance, so I know I can either take in or take out in the future. So these are all my pieces laid out. I have my sleeve, which I'm glad I made really big, because by the time we gather that hem back in, it's going to really make a nice full balloon sleeve. So I've also cut my back panels, a total of 2 of them, and I also cut my back facings. But what I've done with the facings is I've fused them with interfacing on the wrong side, so they are a bit more stable and stiff. So by the time I stitch them into the neckline of the dress, of the blouse, it just stays nice and flat, and it just gives a really nice finish around the neckline of the blouse. So I've also gone ahead and I've cut my front piece, which is just 1 piece because I don't want a seam on the center front, as well as cut my front facing, which I've also fused with interfacing. So the interfacing I use here is the iron-on one, which you just iron on the wrong side of your material with a hot iron and no steam, and it just makes it so much easier to work with facings because they are nice and stiff and they help to finish off the necklines really nicely. So this is my peplum, and it's just 1 full piece, is a full circle, and it's going to flare out beautifully by the time I stitch it into the waist of the blouse. The first thing we have to deal with is the dart. So the nice way I like to transfer my dart from the pattern onto actual fabric is I take the pattern, align it to the edge, and I use a pin to transfer the exact point where the dart meets onto the material. Leave that pin in, just fold the pattern slightly and then mark it with a chalk. So I'm going to do this for the waist and the side dart on both sides of the front panel, and then just pin them, so by the time I take it to the machine, I don't have to think about where the dart ends and where it starts. So I'm just going on here to do it on the other side of the front panel before pinning them and then taking it on to my machine to sew. Once all of my darts are pinned in place, so that means the waist dart and the side dart, I'm going to go ahead and stitch them together on my machine. So here I'm using a normal straight stitch, just sewing from the start of the dart all the way to the end, ensuring to do a reverse stitch when I get to that end, because you want to prevent any occasion of that dart unraveling in the future when you start to wear your blouse with time. So in here, I'm just going to finish off the rest of the front dart of this side of the blouse before going ahead to work on the back panel of the blouse. So we're going to repeat the same thing we did for the front. So we'll get the pattern, place it on top, and use a pin to puncture through the hole where the dart point is, and then use a chalk to mark that particular point, because when you have it marked like that with chalk, you don't have to think about how long the dart is supposed to be and where it's supposed to end. So after marking it in place, I'm going to go in here to find those tiny snips that we made when we were cutting the blouse, and I'm going to pin the dart in place. So once I take this piece to the machine to sew, I don't have to think too much about it. So I'm going to go ahead and sew the back darts the way I did for the front, using a normal straight stitch, starting and finishing off into nothing, ensuring to do a reverse stitch at the end so the dart is nice and secure. So once I've stitched all of my darts in place, that's for the front and for the back, I'm going to go ahead and pin together my side seams, ensuring that my dart is pointing downwards. So I've pinned together the left and the right side seam as well as the shoulder, and I'm going to be sewing them together on a 1 centimeter seam allowance. And once I'm done doing the normal straight stitch, I'm going to go in again and do a zigzag stitch to secure this. This I would normally avoid if my overlocker was functioning, but I need to get that thing fixed like as soon as possible. So once I've done this for my shoulders, I'm going to go ahead and do it for the side seams just to secure them in place. So now that I've stitched all of my side and shoulder seams, I have one full piece for the top half of the blouse, and I'm going to go ahead and work on the facing. So the facing has the front panel and it has the back panels, and we're going to join them together along the shoulder, so we end up having one piece that we can join together all the way around the neckline of the blouse. So I've pinned that in place, and I'm going to take it to my machine and sew on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, doing my usual straight stitch and then going in again to do my zigzag stitch to secure the seam in place. I have also done the zigzag stitch around the bottom of the facing to secure it and to just prevent it from unraveling in the future. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take my facing and put right sides together of the facing to the right side of the blouse. So in here, I'm just pinning the shoulder to shoulder, center back to center back, center front to center front, and just repeat that all the way across the neckline of the blouse. So by the time I take this to my machine, I'm going to sew one continuous stitch from the beginning to the end, but I'm going to make sure I stop 2 centimeters before the center back because I want my zip to sit in place there. So you start 2 cm after the center back, and you stop 2 cm before the center back when joining the facing onto the neckline of the blouse. So I'm just sewing here on a 1 centimeter seam allowance. I don't need to do a zigzag stitch because this is going to be turned inside out. And the thing I do here is I do a top stitch that joins the facing onto the seam allowance on the inside of the blouse. And what this actually does is it's going to keep the facing on the inside of the blouse and prevent it from sort of folding over when you wear this blouse over time. So this is what the stitch looks like, and it's something that I picked up from an internship I did, and I'm so grateful the lady taught me this trick. So as you can see, I stopped 2 cm before the center back because I want my zip to sit there. The next thing we need to do is to fix our peplum, and I have just my one piece of material here. You can decide to make your peplum gathers, you can decide to make your own A-line, whatever really works for you. So here I'm just pinning the center back to the center back of the blouse, the center front of the peplum to the center front of the peplum, and I noticed I had excess. I think I must not have folded the material very well, or I have moved the pattern in a weird way, but I had excess of the peplum around the waist, so I just went ahead and I folded in the excess around the dart in tiny pleats. So this is what it looks like, peplum and blouse unpinned up together, and I'm going to go ahead and sew on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, as well as do my zigzag stitch to secure it in place. Now that we have the top half and the bottom half of the blouse joined together, it's time to fix the zip. So I'm going to be fixing the zip on the center back of the blouse, and I've gone ahead and I've pinned the center backs together. So that's all the way from the bottom hem, as you can see here, to the top. I've also taken the liberty to mark where my zip is going to stop. You can do yours all the way to the end if you actually have an open-ended zip, but because my zip is closed-ended, I've marked where my zip will stop, and I'm going to stitch from that point all the way to the hem of the peplum, because that is going to act as a stopper when you fix your zip on the top half of the blouse. So this is what it looks like at this point in time. I'm just going to go ahead and grab my zip and pin it together on the center back of my blouse. So remember, my center back seam is 2 centimeters, which is approximately 1 inch, give or take. And I'm just going in here to tuck it into the facing. So this is the reason why I left that top part open, because I want to sew that excess tape into the facing. So I'm going to fold the facing outside like this. I'm going to tuck that excess tape inside like I'm doing right here, just folding in the seam allowance like I'm doing, and then I'm going to just use some pins to hold that in place. So by the time I stitch this zip tape onto this facing and center back at this particular point and turn it inside out, you don't even see where the zip ends at that particular point. So I'm just going in here to pin in the rest of my zip on both sides of the back, and I'm going to go ahead and stitch from the top all the way to the bottom, close it off there, and do the same on the other side. So I'm just going in here to stitch off the rest of the zip tape underneath that facing and actual center back of the dress pair, as you can see here. So by the time I fold this inside out like this, it just finishes off that neckline very nicely. Like, it looks really, really good. So this is why I said you can keep your facing step up until this point, or you can do it earlier if you want. Just remember to leave that 2 cm allowance. So this part wasn't perfect. If you look at it very well, it's not really straight, but it works for me. So next up, I'm going to attach my sleeve, but I first need to close the side seams of the sleeve before going ahead to make my channel for my elastic band at the hem, and then putting it in the arm curve of the blouse. So I'm just going in here to sew the side seam on a 1 cm seam allowance, and then going back with my zigzag stitch to secure the seam before moving ahead to the next step. To create the channel for the elastic on the hem of the sleeve, I'm going ahead to fold the sleeve hem by 2.5 centimeters and sew that all the way around, but ensuring to leave an opening through which I will pass my elastic band through. So the measurement of the elastic band is my wrist measurement plus 1 inch ease. So if I stitch it together, it's not too tight and it doesn't cut off my blood circulation. So I'm just going in here to pass the elastic band through. You want to hold the other end with a pin so it doesn't get lost as you pass this particular end through the channel. So once you get to the other end of the channel and you bring it out through the opening that we left, I'm just going in here to remove my safety pin which I used, and I'm going to take the other side that was left behind. I'm going to pin these two ends together, stitch them up on my machine using either a zigzag stitch or several straight stitches to hold them in place before closing off that opening that we have. So here I'm just using a straight stitch, reversing it several times to prevent it from breaking when it's actually inside the tunnel, and then I'm going ahead to tuck it back in and stitch up the opening that I left. So this is what the elastic band in the cuff looks like, the cuff or the sleeve hem looks like, and I'm just going to turn this inside out to see if I actually like it. And Lord, am I grateful that I really exaggerated this sleeve, because it just really looks cool. That's all I can say. It just looks so cool. So go big or go home. So once my sleeves are done, it's time to actually fix it into the arm curve of the dress, and I'm just going in here to push the sleeve through the armhole, and then I'm going to pin together right sides together of the sleeve to the right side of the blouse, as you can see here. So I've pinned together the side seam, I'm pinning together the top of the sleeve, and then I'm just pinning in any other bits that are necessary. So this particular sleeve has a bit of gathers around the head, and I'm going to be showing you how I actually did that. So I've gone ahead and I've pleated in the excess of the sleeve that normally comes at the head, and I've I've made 2 pleats on each side, 2 pleats on the left, 2 pleats on the right of that top of the sleeve head, and I'm going to go ahead and take a look before I actually stitch it up. So at this point I had not stitched in the sleeve. I just wanted to check out how everything was looking. It actually looks really cool. I'm happy, especially with the neckline. The neckline looks really nice and flat and clean. I'm so glad. I think that's what I love most about this blouse. The neckline looks really nice. I also particularly like the fit of the blouse. It's nice and comfortable. I actually tried it on before I went ahead to finish off the rest of my sleeve. So in here I'm just sewing in my sleeve actually into the armhole all the way around from point A to point B, and making sure that when I get to the end I actually do a reverse stitch just to secure everything in place. After doing my straight stitch, I went ahead and I did my zigzag stitch to secure my seam and to prevent it from unraveling in the future. So after doing this on the right hand side, I went ahead and I did it on the left hand side before going ahead to do the final step of this sewing tutorial. So I folded in the hem by about 1.5 centimeters and I stitched that all the way around. So this is the hem of the peplum that we're speaking about, and because it's sewing on a curve, it was nice and tough, but we succeeded. So this is what the blouse looks like. I really like the fact that I didn't make it super tight, so it's comfortable to actually wear, and even if I have a lunch baby or if I put on weight, I know I can still enjoy styling this blouse. I particularly like how I styled it. I went for a fresh, clean look because this material can easily go wrong in terms of styling. But I hope you guys enjoyed watching this tutorial all the same. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, comment all of your suggestions, ideas and thoughts down below, and until my next video, have a good morning, afternoon and evening wherever you are. Bye.